The path to programmatic maturity and the role curation plays in that. I think that before we kick off, let's have an intro as to who you are, Joe, and what you do.
Yep. I'm Joe, so that's easy.
Very good, thank you. This is Joe.
I work at IPONWeb, which I'm guessing a good number of folks are familiar with. We started in the industry as building the back end of the industry. So a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the solutions that power ad tech over the last 15 years have been either through us or in partnership with us. Over the past, there's a little bit of feedback. Over the past few years, we've realized the problem's got to change a bit, or the problem has changed a bit, and it's been less, let's solve the problems with proliferation of additional platforms, and let's actually start to try and, actually I think the last panel was extremely relevant for it. Let's try and simplify the ecosystem, commoditize the ecosystem, and create an environment where value creation can prosper without all the barriers to entry that you have in kind of the legacy model. So what EVP of Principles means is really focused on that side. And in order to build that business out, we need to work not with just the ad tech players, but the principals in the ecosystem. So working with the agencies, the brands, the publishers, trying to solve their problems through the programmatic ecosystem.
And that places you perfectly to have this conversation with me right now.
So.
And before we, thank God,
yeah.
That's helpful, isn't it? Before we talk about curation and its role, you know, we had Dr. Boris on stage at ATS London a few years ago talking about the journey of ad tech and
yep.
the journey of programmatic, and you know, it's getting to kind of moody teenager stages at the moment. It's been on quite a journey. You know, we've heard from yesterday and already the panel this morning, kind of how it's evolving, and you know, the past 18 months has really changed that. When it comes to curation and the value curation can bring, what are the negatives that programmatic has brought that give curation a potential role in the industry?
Yep, I think you heard them in the last panel. We've created, if you think of what we were trying to solve with programmatic, which a lot of us forget or pretend that it wasn't the origin of it, but you go back, I'll say 2 decades, which it's not quite that long, but it feels like it at times. We were trying to solve a problem around remnant inventory for publishers. So how do you use technology to monetize inventory that they couldn't, and leveraging advertiser audience data. And the intersection of those two was supposed to create an environment where it was deliberately obscured, but you would bring advertising dollars into more distressed assets and create a marketplace. I think what ended up happening is what the world that we're in now. So from the tech layer, it was a tremendous success. Everybody loved the idea. We went from low-value media to all media being transacted this way, and we went from a few simple buy-side, sell-side platforms to hundreds of them. And so, when you're dealing with more I wish I had a better word than remnant, but when you're dealing with that inventory, you kind of don't care about the complexity. It's solving a problem. You're not thinking too much more about it. You're getting ads in front of people that you care about in an efficient environment. When you're thinking about your high-value media and you're trying to reach your audience on that inventory, and you have all these layers of complexity, that creates a problem for you. So I think we've made the media buying environment very complex. You have agencies trying to solve problems across multiple platforms by building meta solutions that sit even further out in the periphery of the ecosystem. Those become a burden to manage because they're completely dependent on everyone's APIs and an environment that's constantly changing. There's no normalization of users across these things. So I think we tend to try to solve the problems by creating new layers of complexity rather than just fundamentally solving the problem. And for us, curation means a lot of things to a lot of people. I think when we talk about it, it's really 2 things that we're trying to solve. One, restoring the relationship between the buyers and sellers in almost a pre-programmatic reality. So bringing them in this world where they're trading with each other, where they're sharing data with each other, and restoring or shifting the focus back to value rather than what's happened over the last bunch of years, which is it's moved from creating value with technology to just running complex operations, so ad ops and troubleshooting. And we want to shift the focus back to value creation, if that makes sense.
It does. So give me a simple example of how curation works in practice. So what does curation look like?
Yep, so anybody who knows us knows there are no simple answers. So
that's generally this industry in general.
Yeah. So it's important to talk about the environment that you need in order for curation to work. So there's really two components to it when we talk about it. One was a theme you heard in the last session pretty passionately, that you need a commoditized infrastructure solution. So if you're trying to create an environment where users can come in, look at supply, inject value on top of that supply and direct it, you can't create you can't create value there if you're just injecting new fees and the ecosystem that it's running in is already a high-cost ecosystem. So in order for it to work as a concept on its own, it needs to be in an efficient environment. From that end, it also needs to be scalable. So you need a core technology layer that's just plugged in to publishers, to all the buying platforms, to all the key players in the ecosystem, but it has to be super efficient. So it's more of an SPO play, and that's the foundation of it. And then the next layer is, okay, if that ecosystem isn't creating the value that ecosystem is creating is just access. Curation is where the value is, and that's the ability to inject data, inject audience, inject something that you perceive as valuable into that environment to shape buying activities. So really, it's think of it as a central coordination role. It's really a piece of technology that lets the agencies and the buyers come in simply into the bid stream environment, interact with it directly, shape it based on where they see value, and then distribute it to an access point that they want to trade with, if that makes sense.
You're right, that wasn't a simple answer.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry. So, yeah.
You mentioned SPO, and you know, from an SPO perspective, where buyers are operating, you know, using SPO, supply path optimization, a lot of them have given that responsibility to the DSPs. How does curation fit into that, and does it actually bring the SPO control back to the buyer somewhat?
It does. It's weird because it's all about creating control for the buyer through curation. I think they've, so I started my programmatic career on the DSP side, so tremendously loyal to it, see the value, worked at X+1 for a number of years, which was Poindexter.
You aren't trying to disintermediate the DSP then, certainly not.
Trying to change roles. So I think right now the DSPs have almost too much control in the transaction. They've almost pushed the agencies aside and said, we can do your job better than you. And I don't think that was deliberate. I think it's just the way that they've tried to scale their businesses. The challenge with the DSP having control over SPO is most buyers don't use one platform. They use different platforms for different things. They're not really being transparent about how they're making the SPO decisions. Some are doing better jobs than others, but you're really at the control of the platform itself to decide it, and you can't think about your supply holistically in that scenario. So if you're a media buyer, scaled media buyer, use the big agencies, use the big brands, you don't care so much about the swath of inventory that you're buying through this DSP on its own. You're trying to get the most efficient access to supply across everything. And so we think the only way to accomplish that is move some of that complexity that they're doing on top of the DSPs to in front of them. So back into the center, which earlier I would have said middle, but I feel like center's maybe a little bit better. And it's not about middleware, it's about coordination. So if you're at the center of the transaction, you see all your supply. You're not blinded and you're not filtered by what other platforms are doing. You can make commitments directly with your publishers that you're trading with and understand that. You have full transparency into that infrastructure fee, so you know that you have the most efficient supply path, and you kind of don't care anymore at that point. So then it's about, great, now I have access to supply, but how am I going to create value with it?
And also agencies are they're working on, particularly a lot of the big holding companies are working on building their own custom models, their own audience platforms. How, I'm assuming Curation adds value here because it means that they're not having to put this information, this data, into third-party platforms, right?
Yep. Yeah. So technically, it'd be lying to say if it wasn't. It is a third-party platform.
That's very true. Yeah.
But it's a different third-party platform. I think that's really where we're seeing the interest is as we talk about two big cases with the buyers. One on investment management from Curation, which is just having a centralized view, a holistic view across all your buying activities with publishers, not through multiple hops, but directly, and being able to coordinate all your buying activities there. The other is the data science side. So there's all the, we don't have a good name for them yet, but data science as a service, prediction services, custom algorithms. We think the agency is the agent for the brand. They are a steward of their data. And so they're providing services across that. The curation for them becomes a way of reinforcing that relationship. So they're working with the brands, building these custom models and being able to deploy them into this environment. And there's no leakage. Like the way that we build Curation is it's their system. We don't really know how they're using it, how they're creating value with it. It's up to them. Their models can be impression models, they can just be list filters. It's up to them to decide how to create the value with it, but that is a primary use case for it.
Interesting, and from the publisher perspective as well, we talked at length yesterday about how the publisher really is kind of having its day. They're taking control of their data, and they're taking back control, away from the technology layer, away from the walled gardens. And we talked in the previous panel about the middleware should be they shouldn't have as much of a stake in the game as they currently do. And that's where it feels like Curation actually plays a good role. How does Curation help? We talked about advertiser and publisher relationships. They're trying to foster that a lot, right? Curation feels like it's, again, a good fit for helping to build those relationships back up again and working more closely together and understanding each other's role in the industry.
Yeah. So from the publisher side, it's proximity. So they're not thinking about trading. So publishers are generally blind to where the money's coming from. It's coming from a platform. If it's a deal, they generally understand who the deal originates with, but so much of it just gets lost, and there's so much complexity around that. So the fact that the curators are the buyers themselves, you eliminate a lot of that confusion, and so the publisher's in a place where they're empowered to decide which curators they trade with, what the terms of that trading is, how they can use their data. All of that puts that power with the publisher. And we're seeing them make those decisions. So we'd like a world where they would trade with everyone. It doesn't work that way, and I actually think that proves the model that it empowers them to figure out who they want to trade with, what the terms are, how their data is used, and it's an environment where it's transparent and more of a trusted ecosystem.
Interesting, and you mentioned data science as a service, or DSaaS. Here we go. Let's have a new acronym. We do love an acronym. It hadn't occurred to me actually that there's obviously a lot of data-rich companies out there that could benefit by plugging their data directly into these curation platforms rather than going via the DSP and the SSP. Actually, there's a lot of peripheral companies out there that could do a lot with this and help foster that advertiser-publisher relationship.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing that, and that's a big case. Again, that really only works if you stay with the commoditized infrastructure. So we talk a lot about the fees in ad tech, and I think generally, if ask a buyer, ask a seller, they think it's bullshit, right? They're taking too much out. It's hard to argue that that's not happening. But then you look at those companies, and none of them are making money. So the cost of trading in this ecosystem, there's a tremendous cost of building and maintaining a tech infrastructure. And so kind of our philosophy on this is if you just eliminate all of that, so now these companies that are truly data companies and we consider value creators, they no longer have the barrier of entry of building out an exchange or building out a bidder and maintaining that. They don't really want to be in that business. They want to be in the data business. They want to be in the custom algo business. They need a way of distributing those. So If you have a super efficient environment for them to come in, they're focused on selling their value there, and they don't have the rest of the tax or the costs associated with that. So what we're seeing is it's becoming a more efficient place for the data companies to come in and deploy that. And because they're in the programmatic transaction natively, it's not a hop, it's not a separate integration. They have more control and visibility over how their data is used. So we're seeing a lot of these companies generally just apply their data abstractly. They don't really know if it's creating value. They don't know how much it's being used. They can't optimize it. If you take the curation approach, now you're again at the center. Everything's flowing directly through you. You can actually update cohorts in real time. You can change pricing, bidding behaviors, all that stuff based on the real-time feed. So we're seeing a clamoring there for more, in that they feel like they're finally empowered to be able to create the value that they feel like their data brings. And so that's an area where we're seeing a lot of interest with this.
Yeah, I can imagine. And this new way of accessing this data and being able to overlay it with your own data or with publisher data. We talked yesterday on a fireside chat about how curation is a valuable tool for maybe trying to buy different types of audiences. So for example, buying audiences from diverse and inclusive, or targeting different ways. How does curation give you different access or an easier way to access different types of inventory than otherwise possible?
I think it's all the same. We're not creating new inventory,
No.
so it's all the same inventory. It's really the access and what you do with it. So we're not while I guess by my origin, I've got a bit of marketing background. I was at Merkle for a number of years building out the programmatic media team there. We as a company are pure tech. So we don't see it as our job to try and instruct the curators on how to create value. It's up to them, and what we see they're doing is, in some cases, it's just creating simple cohorts of supply. That, here's I'm a agency, here's my top 50 publishers. I want those always on, and I want to be able to see how much money I'm spending with them, regardless of whether it's programmatic guaranteed deals or open inventory. I just want that on. I want to see everybody in the holding company, how they're targeting that. That's very simple. You can execute that. So it's kind of the grouping. They can create unique clustering of supply for their based on their advertiser targets. It gives them a lot of control for that. Then there's the more complex, which is, it's not just about the supply itself. It's how am I creating value on that supply, and that's where you get into the models. And so the application is kind of user driven. We feel like our job is to just bring it all together and create good workflow solutions so that they can execute that.
Interesting. We're running out of time, but my final question is about, we talked in the panel just now, and we talked again yesterday, that there's a massive wave of fragmentation or decentralization happening in the industry at the moment. Indeed, IPONWeb has been built on the ability to be able to have that fragmentation in the industry, right, and not rely on everything happening in sort of 3 or 4 big companies. How is the fragmentation of the industry, how is curation well placed and well suited to be able to take advantage and leverage all this fragmentation and the new opportunities and new companies that exist out there?
Yep. So this one is, you're right, we built our whole business on the fragmentation. It was wonderful for us. So just building different flavors of the same thing over and over again has been great. I think it's wrong to push down a path of fragmentation again. I think you do need some large scaled commoditized solutions in place that create an opportunity for that value, because otherwise you're doing more of the same. If everybody has to build the whole ecosystem themselves in order to trade, you'll never get to a point where you have you have massive scale and pricing efficiency. So,
and then you have these other layers you referred to earlier that kind of try to manage all of this. These layers come on top and make it even more complex than it already is.
So I think it sounds self-serving, but it's our strategy. So I guess if I didn't believe it, I wouldn't be sitting here. We think the point of, there's always fragmentation. I think we believe that should be the curators themselves. So you come into that ecosystem, as long as there's a scaled place to plug in and create value, then yeah, you should have total selection. And we think what we're seeing right now is the folks who are coming in as curators, there's a lot of diversity among what they're trying to do, because they don't have that complexity of, I have to build this whole platform in order to get access. I can just focus on this differentiator that's niche. And I have access to all the supply, I have access to all the connections, I'm just figuring out what my value prop is. So we think what we're betting on is that we'll create that, the diversity through the curation itself and not fragmentation of the core ecosystems, but time will tell, I guess. So,
as with everything, time will certainly tell. We are out of time, but that's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you.
Give a round of applause to Joe. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.